I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, of course, who really doesn't need any introduction. I don't know of an atheist, I guess, in the world, or a religious person in the world, certainly, who doesn't know the name Madalyn Murray O'Hair, or a version thereof, spelled correctly or not. And I know that that name, of course, if not praise, elicits at least very fear into the hearts of the religious everywhere, we should hope. Madalyn Murray O'Hair, of course, has been struggling since the foundation of this organization for a number of things, for a number of causes, first of which, of course, is to make this country a better place for atheists to live in, for all of you, to make it easier for all of you, to make a place where atheist rights are respected and the constitutional separation of state and church is respected. And she has been laboring toward that end, and I have to say not without your help, the many people along the way in over 27 years of American Atheists that have helped her to do that. And I know that she appreciates each and every one of you. I don't know exactly what she's going to speak about this morning. She hasn't confided that in me. I don't know what she's going to say, but without further ado, Dr. Madalyn Murray O'Hair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now, after all of that, wait till you hear what I have to tell you. You notice how artfully John Murray danced around the subject matter of my speech, because I didn't have time to write one. So at 12 o'clock last night, I said, what shall I do? Because there has been no time at all with getting this convention ready in order to prepare a speech for myself. He said, well, now look, Mom, why don't you wing it? You've been doing it for 25 years now. You can go one more day. So this morning, I sat down and wrote out a couple of sentences here, but by and large, this is another extemporaneous speech with Madalyn Murray O'Hair winging it. I think that I have a title for the speech someplace in the convention brochure, but nonetheless, let's go. Once an atheist, there is no turning back. There is absolutely no turning back, because the absolute practical atheism is totally incompatible with any and every form of religion. The harsh, unguided logic which leads us to atheism inexorably brings us to other positions. And the first of these is that religion ought to be abolished entirely, stricken from the face of the earth, whatever its form. In every forum, we close it off with a sentence that I give. And I always forget what it is that I'm supposed to say, and I wing it there every time, too. That religion has caused more misery in every era of human history to all of humankind, more misery than any other single idea. Religion is diametrically opposed to every aspiration of humankind. It is anti-peace, anti-woman, anti-sex, anti-knowledge, and its ultimate position is that of anti-life. On the other hand, every thinking person in the world is an atheist. Our nation, in fact, is run by atheists. The business and professional men in the United States are atheists. The college professors, the doctors, the lawyers, The Nobel Peace Prize winners, everyone, all of them are atheists, and you know it. But we have something going in the world that has plagued the world since the time of the Greek philosophers and before. And that is that men who hold the position privately of atheism, if they are in positions of leadership in the culture, will always give a public profession of faith. So you have these hypocrites, atheist hypocrites, running our nation from the top to the bottom, from the beginning to the end. And why are they doing this if they really don't believe it? Simply because they are terrified of religion in history, and they also see it as a means to control that great unwashed beast, the masses of humankind. I was talking to a woman of Jewish heritage last night at the Life Members Dinner. She said, you know, for as many times as I've visited there and the relatives that we have in that country, that Israel is 70% atheistic. And it permits those fanatical nuts, the Jews, to run that nation in the way that it is running and to present it to the world as a horror story. And it's the same thing in the USSR. 80% of the USSR is atheistic. And Gorbachev has invited religion back to invade the nation. And with the US, it's the best educated nation in the world. And yet we permit intellectual scum to freeze our nation into the 15th century. We have a president, for example, who ran on two promises. One, that Horton would go back to jail, and two, that the Pledge of Allegiance would be sustained with the phrase "under God" in it. And he was elected for those reasons by a majority of the electorate vote in the United States. One of the phenomena that I see constantly is the extraordinary television outreach, which is the most powerful and impactful, with people being conditioned like Pavlovian dogs by that television. And after they are conditioned for, say, a month on a particular subject, a television poll will be taken to see how well they got the message. And then the microphone is stuck in their face, and they are asked, what do you think about this? And they give Bush an 80% rating of approval, because that's what television has been pushing into their brain for the last month. They parrot back anything that they are told. And I view this with the most dismay that any human being can possibly view it, because we are looking down the nose of medievalism again. I was in the Second World War, and in the Second World War I spent time in Africa, in Italy, and in France. And in that Second World War, even in the Stars and Stripes magazine, I have never, ever seen the kind of censorship that we had for this Gulf War. I have never read anything in any of the newspapers where any group has come out and said, how dare you censor the Gulf War news like this. Business and professional people, their organizations kept their mouths tightly shut. Did the American Bar Association, the American Medical Association, the American Association of University Professors, did anybody, any groups of chambers of commerce speak up? Where in the hell was the ACLU? Nobody said a word that I can find in the newspaper. Where was the Unitarian Church? Where was the Roman Catholic Church, which was monolithic against this kind of activity? When it actually came down to Bush saying, let the bombs drop, every single person groveled like I have never seen in my life. I watched the television to the point that I finally got an upset stomach at nights, and I couldn't turn it on anymore. As we invaded a third world nation, and that's what Iraq is, and we dropped 140,000 bombs on a nation that probably isn't any bigger than Arizona. And I would like to know what in the hell Arizona would look like now if it had received 140,000 bombs. And yet there's not one word, has anyone seen one picture of what has happened in Iraq? Do any of you know if any of those cities still stand? How many know if the water has been restored? How many know whether any energy is available? How many know whether the people have any food? There is not a word out. We are still seized in a grip of censorship. So who the hell cares? I do, because if the President of the United States can, in a world attention-drawing war like that, absolutely cause all coverage to be stopped, what can he do to American atheists? What can he do to any dissent group in the United States? How, from here on in, are we going to get our message out? He has taught an extraordinary lesson. He has taught the lesson of violence. I used to think that the ultimate lesson of violence was in Philadelphia. Do you remember when the radical group in Philadelphia was surrounded and the city blocks of the city of Philadelphia were ruined by firepower of the police? I can't remember how many people were killed, homes destroyed. And I thought always, well, the Philadelphia solution can come to almost any group that the nation doesn't like. But do you notice what Bush, the lesson he has driven home? He has flattened Iraq to show the USSR what he can do. They only need to drive a couple hundred miles and they'll see what goes on. They give up Lithuania or else. They give up Latvia and Estonia or else. He has shown the Arab oil countries what they're going to do or else. And we have just announced that we are in there now on a permanent basis. And we will stay in there on a permanent basis. Don't you realize that we moved into Germany 50 years ago? And 50 years later, we are still in Germany, and Germany is still only struggling to get rid of us now. Saudi Arabia is going to be so goddamn sorry that they invited us in there, that it's going to be incredible, because we are in there to announce that the oil fields belong to America. They belong to the oil companies that develop them, and this is the lesson of what is going to happen to anybody who interferes with, criticizes, or reaches out against the dictates of the United States. This morning when I got up, I'm in a particular executive suite because, one, I got the room free. You filled enough rooms that I'm able to sleep for nothing. And two, because we're the family who brought the convention here to the hotel, and they're going to make lots of money on you and on us. I went out and picked up the newspaper, and a great big color picture confronted me of Easter. I couldn't believe it. This was, I think, in the Arizona Republic newspaper. And I looked at that and I thought, how dare they peddle a story of rotten flesh. 3 days in a stinking tomb in a desert, rising up to save the world. What in God's name is the matter with those people? Ministers all over this city are going to appear in church tomorrow with this incredible, disgusting tale, with the hero of it hanging on a cross, bleeding from wounds, looking out over the populace. And then I get back to my bumper sticker immediately. I have a bumper sticker that I put on my car. It's been on there for 10 years. It says, "Save you. God can't even cure acne. But the bully of the world, the United States, is going to see that this message goes everywhere. It is absolutely going to be accepted everywhere else. And then we have an equally heinous story of the Passover, where the God of the Old Testament killed every firstborn in Egypt. How many people in here are firstborn in your family? Kiss it goodbye. And yet this story is given in newspapers in a continuing way, talking about the heroic Jews, how wonderful this was, how magnificent this God was. Well, first, of course, he inflicted the whole country with one disease after another, not even letting cows escape. And then after all of this, he kills every single firstborn. He instructs every Jewess to steal everything she can get her hands on in every place that they can pick them up. And then they take off, and crossing the Red Sea, they kill on three different occasions every man and beast in the country. And each one of those rotten pieces of flesh had to rise again in order to be killed the second time and the third time. I think that the Jews have to recant this story. I think that we must force them to stop respecting it. I think that we must force the Christian people to an understanding that this is the most bizarre, heinous, sadomasochistic idea that has ever been presented to humankind. The resurrection of Jesus Christ and the Passover. So I keep looking at atheists and thinking, what if atheists were free to do what they need to do? What if the atheists who were running the country here, who were running the professions, who were running the schools, who were running the corporations, what if they were really free to do what they could do without reference to the terror of religion and the suppression of the ability to think by religion? And I think that I get constantly back to the same kind of ideas. I don't know an atheist who is pro-war. I've never met one. I think that we would absolutely demand peace, that we would absolutely demand total destruction of all of our nuclear weapons. There is no need to have any at all. I can't imagine what the United States government thinks would happen, for example, if the USSR actually would come to war with us. Would they send a boat over here with one regiment in order to invade Harlem? Every single one of them would have their throats cut. They would never even get out into the island. Nothing. What in the hell does the United States think is going to happen? How about dropping a battalion in parachutes in Kentucky and let those coal miners get after those son of a bitches? Come on, it's totally irrational, because every war has to end up in a land war, such as we have now occupied 20% of Iraq. The American forces have occupied 20% of Iraq. So that our fears of these nuclear weapons back and forth, I think, are fantasies. But we live on fantasies. We export fantasies. The fantasies are the movies that we produce. And we went through the award ceremony earlier this week. And all of that, the focus of the nation on telling fantasy stories, on an industry of fantasy. Our monetary system is a fantasy system. It isn't worth the paper it's written on. And actually, capitalism itself, if you stop to think of it, is a fantasy, because how many people can get to be a melon? How many people can get to be a Rockefeller or a Ford or anything else? You are going to go through your life without reaching the top 25%, the top 10%, the top 5%. There is no way for you to get that. That is all a kind of fantasy in which we engage. And religion is the ultimate fantasy, because one doesn't have to face life. One doesn't have to face the hard realities and the joyful realities of living. Because after all, the single most important thing is one's soul, which doesn't exist. And the single most important life is life after death, which doesn't exist. And you stop to think of all of these and you say, well, the triangle is on its top. The base is up in the air, floating mysteriously, because there is nothing there. And yet whole lives are led out in those kind of things. So I started to look at the problems in America. What would real atheists do if real atheists were in power? How about drugs? I think that the solution is immediately tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, to open up every hospital and give free drugs to anybody who wants free drugs. I wouldn't even charge them a dime. Number one, you would know who would need real treatment. You would know who would need real help. You would take the profit out of it. And I think that the drug situation would be cured within a year. I don't think that there would be any difficulty. Besides, let the people have the drugs. They're throwaway people anyway. Environmental destruction. You know, we have an army. We had 500,000 people that we took over to Iraq to destroy a country, to totally destroy a country if it was possible. We can take 500,000 people and descend on New York City, for example, and I'll bet you we could clean it up in 6 months. We could take 500,000 people. You know what I would do? If I was the President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the Army, I would send several corps of engineers up to the Great Lakes. I would take every industry that surrounds the Great Lakes that is dumping into the Great Lakes and polluting those Great Lakes and all the rivers, and I would call all the captains of industry in. And I would say, all right, here we are, the United States government, the Corps of Engineers. What we're going to do is, one, clean up your plants free of charge. We are going into your plant, find out why you are polluting, do whatever engineering changes are necessary to stop your polluting. And we're doing this because you hire people. Maybe 100,000 people rely upon you for wages, them and their families. And what we're going to do is clean you up so that you're pollution-free. And it won't cost you a penny. We'll do it with taxpayers' expense, because the air and the water and the ground are important to all people. And employment is important to all people. And after we get done cleaning up everybody around the Great Lakes, then we're going to clean up the Great Lakes themselves. And we're going to make them pollution-free again. And then I would give them the final warning. If any of you pollute even one more drop into the lakes that when we are done, we will take every stock and bondholder and every officer of your corporation and castrate them. We're not going to bother with it anymore. We should do this with the Mississippi. We should do this offshore in the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. We should go in there as a unified nation to do something. And I would pick up the street gangs tomorrow. I would go with trucks and vans and whatever is necessary to pick up the street fighters and the gangs tomorrow. Because a long time ago, during the Second World War, before the Second World War, Henry James, a philosopher in this nation, whom I don't like and who was ultimately very religious, had the idea of an alternate to war. And he put forth the idea of the CCC, which is a civilian concentration camps. Civilian conservation camps. And those young men who should have been or would have been inducted into the army, he took into the camps and he taught them, one, to keep their body and their clothing clean, to keep themselves free of disease, to teach them that the land was what we lived on in conjunction with the land. And many, 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 I think also of the things here in Arizona were put in by the CCC, where they went in and dug ditches, and where they went in and maintained soil so that it would not erode. And these young men were all over the nation in order to help the ecology of the land, although they weren't speaking of it in those terms in that day. What they were speaking of was getting them the hell off of the unemployment lines, because unemployment was so high. But I think that we need to take these youths and commit them to something that is needed in the human community, and from which they will come away with a value system, so that they will no longer get themselves involved in the kind of idiotic killings and drug wars that we have in the streets of America. I think all young people are educable. Every single one can learn. And there's no sense in having them thrown to the gutters, thrown to the wolves, because we will not step out. We will not do anything to preclude the continual wastage of this young life. Does anybody in this room think that we actually need $80 billion more to heal the S&L, the banks both, and the regular banks? It appears to me that we could take another Army contingent, maybe this time intelligence. Two mutually exclusive words. And that we should track down every person who ever made a dime on the S&L or on the regular banks, and we should strip them of every penny of money that they got out of there. We should do this with HUD also. There shouldn't be a one that escapes it. I also am convinced that no judge should ever be permitted to sit on any bench until he spends his first year in his new assignment as a judge in either a county, a city, a state, or a federal penitentiary. It seems to me to be incredible. In Texas, we have no more place to put prisoners. We are actually having free enterprise come in and build jails in which we lock up the people and we pay them, say, $50 a day to care for a prisoner, and they use $3 a day to care for the prisoner, and we're getting nowhere out of that. I think every single prison must be made into a rehabilitation center, an education center, and I would see to it that quite frequently the families of those prisoners get an opportunity to move in with them. And I mean that in this way. There should be small towns built within the confines of those penitentiaries or jails. And those persons who desperately need a trade or desperately need a normal life, their wives and children can come in and stay with them for a month or 2 months or 3 months and even take part in the educational process, so that they do not become recidivists, so that they do not get back into the jails again, so that they do not involve themselves in the same kind of crimes. And I think most of the atheists would have these kind of reactions if we had any opportunity. I think also most atheists would see the folly of some things. For example, I can't believe that in every city we have hundreds of thousands of man-hours wasted with little meters and gauges and clerks and billing clerks and bills and computers for electricity or telephones or gas. It appears to me that the city of Phoenix should just pay so much, a flat fee to the gas company or the light company or the telephone company, and have free of charge for every single home free electricity, free telephone, free energy. There isn't a reason in the world, and I'll bet you that your bills would be cut in half. If you paid it as a tax bill at the end of every year, I can imagine that getting rid of all of that excessive junk, you would be able to have your telephone for perhaps $50 or $100 a year. If it was just a lump sum provided to the telephone company from the tax base in order to take care of that. But we don't look at any of those problems in this way. We don't look at the problems in relationship to a solution. We don't look at the problems in relationship to what will be a better way of doing it. All of the persons who sell on credit, all of the persons who try to collect afterwards, have indicated over the years that there's only 3% of cheats. 3% who really don't pay their bills. And I think that it would be the same if we had a gross outreach to all persons for free energy, free water, free everything. And I think that also that this would be a way perhaps to conserve what we have. But we aren't looking for any of that. We have a legislative body in Austin, Texas, which has been in the same building for 130 years, and every single year they pass at least 35 to 40 laws. For 150 years, you pass 35, 40 laws every year. We need this much government. I think that we could do without legislative bodies in any of the states tomorrow. I think that we could close them up and have administrative and executive areas of concern, and we wouldn't need those bums. We're not making any movement toward any of this. We're not doing any new analysis. We continue with exactly what we have done before. The United States Congress is now so corrupt. The Keating Five. Did anybody ever think that any of them would ever get anything but a slap on the wrist? And we have this in a continuing flow in the United States, where there is a refusal to face the fact, the refusal to try a new initiative, the refusal to do anything that might ameliorate the condition of humankind or cut down the individual costs for each of us, because so few of us get any kind of a decent wage. Incidentally, as a final remark, I see that my time is up. Thank God. I think that as a final remark, I would like to say something about another headline in the paper today, that the minimum wage has just raised to $4.25 an hour. If we have a minimum wage in the United States, I think that we have to have a maximum wage, a figure beyond which no one can go. And everybody says, oh, you'll kill incentive, you can't do that. Well, I've got an answer to that too. As a matter of fact, I've got an answer to damn near everything. If the minimum income for any family in the United States was put at $1,000 a month, which is much more than $4.25. If the minimum income was put at $1,000 a month, and the maximum income was put at $1 million a month, so that any one person could make 1,000 times what another person made, depending on their industry, their ambition, their intelligence, their education, that should be sufficient And yet we have hundreds of thousands into the millions of persons making more than $12 million a year. Also, they should be warned, use it or lose it. Keep it in circulation or you don't get the same next year. And I think that we should impose very stringently those kind of models on there. One of the reasons I think that this is necessary is because of the continued population explosion that we have in this and in every other country of the world. About 6 or 8 years ago, I was interviewed by the Associated Press when they were just waking up to the fact that there was pollution abroad. And they sent down a man from New York to interview me in the American Atheist Center office. And he came in and he said, well, what do you think about the pollution that is going on today? And I said, well, the main thing that I'm thinking about, the main thing that I'm worrying about, and I always get people call me to one side and say, why don't you clean up your language, Madalyn? I have a speech about that too. I've got the answer to that. I said to this Associated Press reporter, there are 3 billion people in the world, and I would like to know what anybody plans to do with all that shit. There is no way. Do you realize how much urine we produce in a day? 3 billion people urinating? We have to stop the population growth. I am one of the most if not the most independent person in the United States. But I yield when I know that my nest is despoiled, because no animal fouls its nest, no animal. I yield when I find that the species in which I am in is despoiling the world for itself and for all of its fellows. Then I yield and I say, we must preserve the species. We must preserve the world we live in. We must yield some of our individualism, as little as possible, in order to see that the whole thing is going to survive. And I think that this is most important. We should, if we possibly can, have some kind of a world tribunal in which we bring the Pope in for the crime of asking women to breed. I think that we need to pick up Ronald Reagan and charge him with crimes against humanity. President Bush should be impeached only for the Contra before we even get to Norton and the pledge, before we even get to the Gulf Bay, before we even get to Nicaragua, before we even get to Grenada. He should be impeached now. He's a detriment to the world. And we can't get it done by sitting and thinking about it. The atheists who do have guts, the atheists who are open and out front, the atheists who are aggressive, if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. Take a look. Take a look. In Phoenix or in your town, what legislator is going to speak up? In Washington, D.C., is your congressman going to speak up? Is your senator going to speak up? What educator is going to speak up? What minister is going to speak up? What businessman is going to speak up? Oh, didn't you see the president of IT&T rushing in and say, hey, no more in the Gulf? Didn't you see that, though? Or IBM, or anything. Nobody is going to do it except us. I would like to recommend that you go to a meeting that's going to be chaired by Maria Elena Castle. I love that name. There was a beautiful song about Maria Elena. And her message is The government belongs to the person who goes to the meetings. The government belongs to the persons who get there. The government belongs to the people who open up their mouth. Boy, you got a leader that's giving you a message, because I open my mouth all the time. And I expect you to do likewise. Thank you very much.